Hi there, it's Denise Eckert, and I love coming on here and sharing different ideas and techniques to help you lower the stress in your life. And today we're going to talk about anger. And I've got a specialist here. Her name is Bronwyn Schweigerdt, and she's a licensed psychotherapist and anger expert. She also has a podcast, which is called Angry at the Right Things. Now, what inspired you to do this type of work, to get into the anger?
Yeah. Well, I'm a psychotherapist. So honestly, I feel like anger is the emotion that the general public and also pretty much the mental health community seems to really get confused on consistently and not know how to do it well. Within the therapeutic community, you hear of anger management. And I have a problem with anger management because I don't view anger as necessarily a problem. I think we're already telling ourselves that it's problematic, that anger always is a problem if we need to manage it. I'll have clients come to me and say, I have anger issues. And I'll say, well, tell me about the people in your life because anger isn't just one person's issue. I mean, of course, it can be problematic how we externalize that anger out of our bodies. That can be a problem. But anger is always developed within a relationship with someone else. People aren't just chronic angry people, but there's things that trigger it, and those are always relationships. And so I'll say, tell me about these relationships in your life. And then they start telling me, and I'll say, oh, your anger isn't the problem. This person is the problem. And you aren't externalizing the anger out of your body very well because you're not creating boundaries or assertiveness or accountability very well. That's actually the problem, is the interaction.
Now, for someone that's listening to this and realizes that they do have a lot of anger in their lives, what are the first steps that they could take to create that awareness?
Yeah. So anger management is, in my definition, it is managing symptoms. A lot like the medical establishment in general, where we just look at symptoms and we don't ever say, well, why do we need to remove your gallbladder? Why is it filled with bile? What's your diet like? Why? Let's examine that. So same thing with anger. Like instead of looking at the symptoms of how to manage it, oh, let's take deep breaths, count to 20, whatever. Let's look at why it's there. Let's look at the root. And so I like to say anger is like the light on the dashboard of our car saying, hey, check under the hood. Something's wrong. And the goal there is to bring that something wrong to resolution, to repair. And same with anger. Anger is our body saying, something's wrong. Let's go to the root. Let's check under the hood and bring about resolution and repair. And so if we can start having that kind of relationship with our anger, not seeing it as bad, not seeing it as something to manage, but seeing it as a signal, as a barometer of something being off, and then look at why we're having it. And the other thing I want to say, so people with anxiety, people with depression, I really view those things as suppressed anger that is stagnating inside of our bodies. So when we disassociate from our anger, if I say, what, Bronwyn? Don't be angry. I'm sure he didn't mean it that way. If I talk myself out of the anger doesn't go away because it's an emotion and we can't logic ourselves out of an emotion. The anger's still there and it's there for a good reason because the truth is it's not okay the way this person talked to me. And so if I just ignore it, it's going to stay in my body, even though it's invisible. It's just as real as this laptop I'm talking to you with right now. It's still there and it's now turning into maybe depression or maybe some anxiety. So I need to tap into it. I need to see it for what it is and say, what, Bronwyn, it's okay to feel angry at your boss when he continues to talk to you in that condescending way. That's okay to feel. That's not dangerous. It's not bad. I don't have to have some kind of moral judgment. It just is. Like, that's okay. And so when I can start there and just validate it and just allow myself to feel it in my body, where do I feel it? It's usually in my chest. Although a lot of people feel things in their gut, that's actually where we feel betrayal. So that can often be shame that we feel when someone betrays us, but it can also be disgust at the person who's betraying us. So chest and gut, although we can feel it in a lot of places too. Some people feel it in their face. But yeah, so starting there and just going, okay, I'm just going to feel this anger in my chest. And then after that, well, what do I need? What do I need when I am angry with my boss? Well, I've already tried to tell him that I feel like he's disrespectful and he didn't really listen, or I feel intimidated because he's my boss and because I think he'll like do something if I do that. He's not a safe person. So then what do I need? Maybe some accountability. Maybe I can't have a boundary with him necessarily because he's my boss, but maybe accountability. Maybe I need to document for myself these patterns that I'm experiencing. So I have them on a document, and then maybe go above his head and just go to the HR or go to his supervisor and just document and just share these. So there's different things. So the main three things are accountability, boundaries, and then assertiveness. And assertiveness can just be, hey Denise, we said we'd meet at 9 and it's 9:20. What's going on? So that's me externalizing my anger. I don't sound angry, but I am, but I'm externalizing it in a safe, healthy way. And I'm open. If you say, oh, I'm so sorry, Bronwyn, I got in a car accident, then my anger's gone. But if this is a pattern that keeps happening and you are deflecting or defending, then that gives me wisdom. Our emotions are there to give us wisdom, like how to proceed. They're there to give us guidance.
Yeah, that's very important to realize that there are things we can do about our anger. And it's just basically telling us that there's something wrong.
Yes.
Now, for someone that has problems creating boundaries, can you give some boundary tips?
Yeah. Well, boundaries, there's all kinds of boundaries. So, personally, yeah. So, maybe we should talk about why someone would have a problem with boundaries. Maybe tell me
Uh,
more about what you're thinking when you say that.
Well, some people feel intimidated to, for example,
Mhm.
talk to their boss about different things. Is there a way that we can approach situations and create boundaries that make us feel better, that shed a light on why we're angry?
Sure. Well, first, again, just starting with validating this anger. It's okay to feel this. This is I'll say to myself, and this is what I do with my clients, I'll say, that is objectively infuriating that your spouse continues to talk to you like that when you've already brought it up. So we can just say that to ourselves. That is objectively infuriating, or that's objectively annoying, or that's objectively irritating. Just give ourselves permission to feel it. That does a lot. That keeps us from anxiety, that keeps us from depression. So that's the first step, and we can't overlook that. But as far as the boundaries or the assertiveness, if we feel intimidated, oftentimes I think we do that because we associate that boundary or that assertive speech with that person either shaming us or abandoning us in some way because that was our childhood experience. So if even if it's very unconscious, so if when we were 2 years old and we went through the quote terrible twos and differentiated from the parent and said things like, no, I do it. And if we had a parent who could not handle that because they took that personally and they didn't appreciate that that is a necessary developmental phase for a child, and they shamed us or they threatened abandonment, like giving us the silent treatment, or like their change of voice, their tone of voice changed and became very cold, or they were distant in some way, that imprint is still there in our brain as an adult. And it's going to make us associate our assertiveness, our boundaries, with abandonment or rejection of some kind and or shame. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Now, I'd like to sort of step back a little bit, and
Mhm.
you mentioned the effects that suppressing anger has on ourselves. Now, you mentioned depression and anxiety. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, the reason I actually became a therapist. This is my second career. I was actually very happy in my first career. I already had a master's degree. I did not want to go back to grad school and get a second one. But I myself was in a very, very severe depressive episode, and I was desperate for a good therapist. And I would say a good therapist is a mirror. There's someone who, reflects, gives you back a true reflection of yourself, because we're all blind to ourselves. And especially when we're struggling mentally. And I needed that. I needed someone to help me make sense of why I feel like I'm losing my mind. So I could not find a good therapist. I went to many therapists, and finally I decided, Bronwyn, I think you might be the best therapist you can find. So that's what launched me back to get the second master's degree and become a therapist. But in retrospect, I see how that depressive episode and the subsequent one after that one that lasted years were both a result of my own suppressed anger that I did not feel entitled to align with. So the first one was actually anger at my husband, because we had just moved and I was in a new place. I didn't have a single friend. I knew no one. I was lonely. He went to work every day. We moved for his job, but I didn't have a job because I lost my job when we moved. And I'm just like by myself all day, every day. And I tried to express my desperation to him, my loneliness one evening. And I was looking for empathy and understanding, and I did not get that. And we've talked about it since. It was because he felt so guilty, because he felt responsible for how much I was struggling, and he didn't want to acknowledge it. But what it did to me is I felt very angry, but I disassociated from my anger. And so it created this tremendous depression inside of me. The second depressive episode was when I was starting as an intern, as a therapist, in an intern program. And my supervisor asked, or didn't really ask, he assigned me for my very first client, a couple. And if anyone is in the therapy world, you do not start with a couple. Like a couple, doing couples counseling is you really need training to do it, and you really need to be seasoned, and you really need to have a lot of confidence and experience under your belt. It's just a very, very more nuanced dynamic. And I even know licensed therapists who won't see couples. And so I was not ready, to say the least, to see a couple. And I said, hey, Dave, I'm not ready to do this. And he said, you're going to see the couple. And I betrayed myself, because instead of saying, well, Dave, well, this sounds like it's not a good fit for me to be an intern here at this clinic. Instead of doing that, I said, okay. And I saw the couple. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I did a horrible job. They were floundering. I was floundering. And I just got more and more depressed. But it started with me not being assertive with Dave and not having that boundary. And I betrayed myself. And when we betray ourselves, when we don't have a voice with someone, when we don't say, hey, husband, I need your empathy right now. I need you to put me first because I'm struggling. When we don't do that for ourselves, we will get depressed and we will get anxious.
And you know what? I never thought of that. And it's so true that when you are doing couples therapy, you're doing two therapies in one and then trying almost a third one because you're putting the two together and a third one. And yeah, that's extremely challenging.
It's challenging, and there's a lot of anger. And if you don't know how to manage that, you're going to do a disservice to that couple. And I did. And yeah, that all contributed to my depression. Mhm.
Yeah. Now, when we're talking about anger, how are anger and stress related?
Yeah, so I would say probably stress is dissociated anger that's stagnating in our bodies. I think we use the word stress like, I'm just stressed. And I think we're angry and we're not attuning with our anger. We're not aligning with it. We're not saying, hey, it's okay to feel angry. What do I need right now? Because our feelings tell us our needs. So if I'm feeling angry, that tells me I need to move forward in some way. It's there to give me wisdom. So the word emotion, most of that word is the word motion. Our emotions are there to elicit motion, to move us forward in a way so we feel better, so things are better, so there's order and structure in our lives that's livable and less chaotic. So that's really how I view all this.
And I have a question. Can you describe as a definition what anger really is? Like
No,
not a
that's good.
dictionary,
Yeah,
but
that's
because
a great
all of
question.
us, it's an emotion, but it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what anger is.
No, I like that question a lot. So in the therapeutic world, we say that anger is a secondary emotion, meaning that it's covering other emotions underneath it if we kind of do a deep dive. And what I find lie under most anger are feelings of a betrayal or abandonment or rejection. And those three feelings are very much one and the same. They're just kind of different aspects. So I might feel angry with the person who cuts me off on the freeway, but that anger is going to come and go real fast. But if you're my partner, if you're my parent, you can betray me because I have a very different expectation of you than a stranger on the freeway. And that can hurt me so much more than a stranger who comes and goes. And now that feeling of rejection is so profound that I'm not even allowing myself to feel it. So I'm just feeling anger, if that makes sense. So if we can go to those underlying feelings, like in a marriage, let's say, when I do get angry with my husband, I try to dive under the anger because anger is not really productive as much as going to the vulnerable emotion and then saying, Steve, I'm feeling abandoned emotionally by you right now. If I can do that, he can work with that. But if I'm just angry and I'm yelling at him, there's nothing to work with there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and usually that person gets angry back, and then it becomes
Mhm.
a ping pong game of anger.
Yeah. They might get defensive. Absolutely. So, however, those vulnerable feelings are very vulnerable, and not everyone is a safe person to be vulnerable with. So, again, if I'm having a boss who is condescending to me, I'm not going to be vulnerable necessarily. So I can just say, that's really infuriating. I'm not going to name that I feel abandoned by him or rejected, right?
Now, I love the name of your podcast, Angry at the Right Things. Now, can you describe that a little bit? Like, do you have guests on there? Do you have people phoning in questions? Is it interactive?
So I have a lot of longer episodes where I have a co host. She's actually my best friend. And so we have like a dialogue about it. And I love that because she's not a therapist. So she kind of represents a lot of the listeners with good reflections and questions that I might not come up with. And then some of my more recent podcasts are just much shorter and it's just me kind of talking about one single thing. So, but it's a lot of it's educational. I'll talk about borderline personality disorder, for example, which is a lot like narcissism. And if you might have someone in your life who is borderline, who has a borderline personality disorder, or if you yourself might have one and what to do with it. I'll talk a lot about codependency. A lot of people who seek out therapy and self help have a lot of codependency and what that looks like. And we get really practical to like what to do if you're codependent. So, going back to kind of what we talked about before, people who have a hard time with those boundaries, those are people who we would term on the codependent spectrum because they usually do associate any sign of any anger as like the equivalent with being abandoned or being shamed. And they're very afraid of that. And so if we don't address that root template in their brain that taught them that showing anger or any kind of assertiveness is going to lead to something scary like abandonment, if we don't work with that, that's never going to really jive for them. They're never going to be able to overcome that, if that makes sense. So we need to go back to the root. And I do a lot of exercises for the listeners that I call integration exercises, where we integrate with our inner child, where I lead them in picturing little Denise at age 2 when she was given the silent treatment by mom because she tried to assert her own independence, and integrating with her and picturing her in your imagination and just talking with her and saying, little Denise, I know it feels terrifying that mom is really detached right now and she's really acting like she doesn't want to be around you because you had a boundary with her. And I know how scary that feels. But little Denise, I need you to know that I'm here now. And even if she does abandon you, I'm not going to abandon you. And I will fill the role of being that consistent attachment figure that you need and that you want. And that's my job. And I'm sorry that I have not been doing my job. I didn't realize that I've abandoned you too, that I've actually related to you a lot like our mom related to us. And I'm realizing that now, and I'm sorry. And I'm going to earn back your trust in me by being consistent, by seeing you, by prioritizing your feelings and your needs. And I'm going to advocate for you. I'm going to give you a voice and I'm going to protect you from here on out. And you matter to me. And I will be that person. So when we do that for ourselves, we integrate. And if we are not integrated, if we are not whole, then we won't be able to successfully detach from other people in a healthy way because we need them too much. We're codependent, we're relying on them to give us some kind of completion that only we can do for ourselves.
Wow, that's a lot of information. Okay, so we're going to be wrapping this up. So, Bronwyn, what are your final words of wisdom to the audience today?
Yeah, I would say life is too short to betray ourselves. And when we learn to be true to ourselves, when we learn to be consistently, to trust ourselves, to be true to ourselves, we become alive in a way that we never really have been. And I can say that myself as I'm 54 now. It's only been about 4 years since I've really been truly alive. Learning to trust myself, learning to no longer betray myself. And the depression, the anxiety, even the physical symptoms like insomnia, like GI disorders, headaches, migraines, um, all of those things start to really abate because we are really becoming whole and doing what is true for ourselves to make ourselves flourish. And that is not a selfish thing at all, because when you think of a flourishing tree, that's a tree that provides shade and habitat for thousands of creatures and it provides fruit even. So flourishing humans are something that the world desperately needs, and that's a good thing. There's going to be people in our lives who don't want that, who are find that too provocative, but on the whole, it's what the world really needs us to be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Such incredible information. So, if you're interested in finding more about Bronwyn, I will be putting all our social media and our website information wherever you're watching and listening to this. So, feel free to contact her and ask her your questions. And thank you for listening today. And I'm just going to give you a gentle reminder to slow down and enjoy life. And I'll see you in the next episode.